Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting episode of the Church Encourager podcast. Every episode is exciting when I'm with you, Dad. So thank you for being here. Hey, we had Kingdom Alignment. I almost said Kingdom Alliance, which makes it sound kind of Star Wars-y, but it's not that. It's Kingdom Alignment, part 9. And, you incorporated a message you've done before, but it's always really relevant to us with this. And you spoke of how no one can serve two masters, both God or mammon. And and it helps kind of rephrase the conversation of spending plans, as you said, instead of budgeting. And I'm going to ask this one first in our discussion guide, just because I get to do an impression. And Proverbs 22 verse 7 says, "The borrower is slave to the lender." And now, whenever I hear that verse, I think of Dave Ramsey, because he says that all the time. But it is so true. And anyway, I'm not going to do a Dave Ramsey impression. I almost decided against it. How does the concept of financial debt connect to the broader biblical theme of freedom and slavery that runs through the entire story of Exodus?
Yeah, well, the Exodus story is so powerful, and I talked about it in that, it was deliverance, right? It was God rescuing us, rescuing the people of Israel first and foremost out of all the slavery and bondage they were in Egypt for those hundreds of years, and bringing them into the promised land. And that it's fascinating because he took them into the desert where they would have to trust him, and that he would provide. And yet almost immediately the people thought they wanted to go back into slavery and bondage, because there was something about it where I think they felt a little more in control, even though they weren't. And I think that can also happen with us when it comes to really trusting God and living the way that he sets out for us, or deciding we want to do it in ourselves and not wait. And that's how we get sort of messed up with getting ourselves into debt. And once you're in debt, it's very hard to get free from it. You really have to make a decision that you're no longer going to live that way. And it's not easy. I mentioned it in some of the surveys, I don't think all of them, but I was about 47 when I finally said, okay, we got to do this. And it took several years of no credit cards at all. And, slowly paying off the debt that we had. And then, trying to save a little bit of emergency money and getting used to saving. I did say that, fortunately for me, I think, the giving thing we got really early, even when we were in debt and everything. We just knew that was how what we were supposed to do with that first 10% of our income. So that's something we've done since about the third week we got saved. Always, no matter what the situation, it was just assume that was God's and he'd take care of us, and he does. But that's a very hard message to get across to people who are really stuck in debt, that not only are you in debt and now it feels like you're being asked to give 10%. Where's that coming from? So I've often thought that the way to approach this in the world, in the culture today, is, look, that needs to be your goal and your heart, that you want to be a giver. And 10% is very biblical. People will argue that for different things, whatever. But I think if you read through the Bible and you don't feel stressed, you can see that that's kind of what people do, and then so it's a goal anyway, and so have that in your heart. God knows your heart. That's my heart, God, but I want to be a wise steward, so I need to get out of debt, and I'm going to attack that. And then I should have some savings. I'm going to attack that. And then when I learn to live within my means, then my heart desires to give, and I hope I can give even more than the 10, right? So but all of this process to get out of slavery, it's that first big decision is to live at like 80% of what you make and not at 120. It's a big deal because it's like when you're used to living that way, and then all of a sudden you go, okay, but that's not really how, that's not real. I'm living in a way that I will forever stay in slavery and bondage to debt. And so that first choice is a hard one. I'm going to stop that and I'm going to figure out, what do I make? Get down to 80%. I got to live on that. And then I'm going to pay off the debt first, get that done. And that's going to free up some of that money. And then I'm going to pay off, then I'll start to save. Then hopefully I can become a giver, because it is the most fun you can have with your money. It's because it's how God wires us, is to be givers. And I think we actually feel frustrated when we can't, or we feel stressed because somehow deep down we know we should, and yet it's all gone in other ways and we can't live it. So I really feel I have shared those slides in the past because I feel like it's a way to approach this subject that keeps people engaged. Where if you just start going to, you need to be giving 10%, people disengage pretty quick and go, well, you're just like, that. And so it's okay. Right? People have to wrestle this out with God for themselves. But God loves a cheerful giver. And it's very hard to give it cheerfully if you're not able to, what I mean? If you haven't sort of planned on that 10% is yours, God. And so I'm happy to give it. It just keeps us stuck, and God doesn't want us stuck. But this is the big stuck. I think one of the biggest stuck things we have in our culture right now is that people can't, and so they don't, and then they feel bad about it and don't want to hear about it. And it's very hard to get free if you can't begin to look at where your heart is. And so these last three messages have all been about the same thing. What's got first place in your heart? That's what you're worshiping, and needs to be God. And here are some ways to tell, and then gives us something to work on from there.
It is so practical. And the thing is, you made the point where you were thankful that like all you were called to give was 10%, because the enemy takes way more than that. And you can look at something like debt. The debt is going to get its money. You know what I mean? And we too often just refuse to do things like wait. Like, I want it now. And the way that just purchasing things works here in America, it's so easy. There is no friction. I have Amazon, and I think I've mentioned it in this podcast. There's just add to Monday's delivery. You no longer have to really think it through. You don't just leave it sitting in the cart. There's none of that. You just say, click, I want it. And, you do that a few times a week and your Amazon budget just gets blown to smithereens. And we can do that with anything, right from your phone, sitting, doing nothing. And a lot of the time you're just buying things you really didn't need, like I probably didn't need 300 deli containers, but it was really easy to get. And now I have them. And now they're in my shed downstairs when I might eventually need them. And all that happened because I wasn't willing to just deal with the Tupperware situation or figure out that, you know what I mean? Like, not that that's putting me back, praise the Lord, and I have an emergency fund. But man, just the ability to just acquire things, and that consumerism that so easily entangles us, that's going to take way more of our lives than 10%. And you go back to 10%, and it is hard for us both to ask the church for money. Neither one of us like it, but that 10% is kind of like first fruits. It's like it's the first thing you do. And everything kind of stems from that, because it trains your mind to think outside of your consumerism. And if we can get to a place of stewardship rather than consumerism, it changes our outlook on our acquisition of things. And I love things. I really enjoy stuff. I enjoy the stuff that I have. And last month I was on a cooking kick, and I bought more meat than I needed. And I was like, well, I'm going to eat all of this meat. I'm not just going to leave it in the freezer for 6 months, which, previous Doug might have done because he would have gotten on a kick and then lost interest a week after. I've almost eaten through that big pile of meat. But man, it is such an easy thing to fall into. And it's not some big statue. It's not some thing that we see. It's our own hearts that can just take over. Well, I want it, and I want it now. I don't feel like waiting. I'm just going to get it because I can press this button, I can sign this document that says I can have it, and I'm not really concerned about what it costs me a month because I can kind of afford the monthly payment. You do that too many times. My generation struggles with the buy now, pay laters. And I don't think you even mentioned it in your message because, it's they have Affirm and Klarna. Do you know what those interest rates are for those services? They can get up to 40%. For, you buy something at 40% interest, that's a huge markup. And the dangerous thing with the pay in
It doesn't
fours,
even, I don't even know how that's legal.
it's
That's like,
again, you get yourself in a position where your credit score isn't good enough. They will charge you that much. I
Yeah.
just save. What a concept that is. Use money that you have. Little.
yeah,
Go ahead.
we've laughed a few times about over the years, and you haven't lately, but I had to talk you out of getting a new car. I don't know how many times.
Well, it happens every year or so.
And I'd be
I
like,
look at the car I drive. I'm like, man,
uh,
I could have something better.
yeah, you could, but it's like if you can get to a point where, so like, um, I the last car I bought, and I don't have enough money to just go and buy a car.
Yeah.
And I know that some people would tell you always buy used cars, but I can't take. So anyway, I don't get expensive cars. I drive a Kia, and the last car I got, I I uh I had a little interest payment, but I made double payments till it was paid off. And then this car, that car was still pretty good trade-in value. So when I traded it in and I got this newer car, but I waited until it was 0% interest.
Yeah.
And so now I'm not making double payments because it's like, what's 0% interest? There's nothing conducive to paying it off quick. But it's well within my budget. It's not going in debt. I've had, even when I always make car payments even when I don't have one.
And you
so
live
that when
10
I go to
miles
get
away from church. So like cars are a need, but cars can be a trap. And
Yeah.
all of us are susceptible to it. I'm fortunate. I've always had a rule that never more than one car payment when I've had one. I haven't had one in a couple of years, and it's just so freeing financially.
Yeah.
But they're writing car notes that last 8 years now. An 8-year commitment to a vehicle. And most people are sort of done when they're in that lifestyle with a vehicle in about 2 or 3 years. And then they just trade it in, add on the debt, and they just, I see on social media people with like $1,400 car payments.
Yeah.
And it's like, guys, that's insane.
It's a house payment in a lot of places. Yeah, but people, again, I'm not picking up. This isn't a.
I'm not trying to
we
pick.
we
but
both live pretty close to work. We only have
I
one
could walk
vehicle.
to work almost.
Yeah, yeah.
it's too hot.
And it's Alice and I have one vehicle, and so it needs to halfway run. I got to be able to have a vehicle that runs. So it's
You do have a golf cart, so that kind of.
and I have a golf cart too, which is it's a 1997 good year for golf cart.
Yeah, you live in a gated
I
community.
don't have a
but
fancy golf cart.
Right,
I have a get me around golf cart.
Yeah, that is
so
a second vehicle.
Yeah, but these are just things that culturally we have to think about, or else we never get free. And I try and encourage people when you're free from it, it's completely different. The life is different. And then it's once you start to decide, it's a little easier to wait on purchases and think through them. And I really try and encourage people when okay, well, if you really want it, I get it. Hey, you got to save for it. Or if you still really want it, figure out a plan to get it, but make sure it's in your budget and think about it overnight. And don't don't buy anything like I got to have it right now, because you're almost always sorry that you do it. And so there's, just a matter of making those choices on what's going to be the most important thing to you. But
Yeah.
you're right that that box, that first 10, I leave on purpose. It isn't the first spot giving. It's like that really should be what's first. But I don't think I can put that on people. I don't feel like comfortably putting that on people if they're way out on the other end, because it's just not there. And then, then where do you start to go? Well, what I don't buy groceries, and I always feel, it's like, oh, well,
Right.
I don't want you to do that.
You
It's like,
know, yeah, I would say really get on a good budgeting system before then. And you even said start at 1% giving. You know what I mean? Like 10% giving isn't a requirement to be loved by God, and I think it's wise of you to start with get your finances in order. Because if you're, paying a 40% buy now, pay later with a $1,400 car payment, there's probably not enough margin in your life to give 10%. So it's like, how do we arrange these things? And, earlier in this podcast, you use the word you have to attack it. And in terms of money, it's a behavioral thing, right? So you kind of have to attack those decisions that cause that. And ultimately, you've said this in messages, what causes the triggers that make me want to do that? Is it, is it comfort? Is it who are we looking to for comfort? Is it stability? Who are we looking to for stability? Are we okay just not having something? You know what I mean? Because all of those things change our mindset. But man, if we don't have financial margin in our life, we can't think the way we're supposed to think. Our hearts can't operate the way they're supposed to operate. So it's such a heart condition is our spending habits. And it all boils down to this point. Spend less than you earn. Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's
Well, get down to 80 and you'll be, and then even back it up a little. It's funny when I laugh sometimes, because when we were really attacking our debt, there was no money. And I would go to the grocery store, and I used to have to buy the cheapest paper towel they made. And some people would say, well, you shouldn't even buy, but I wanted paper towel. And I can remember looking at the better paper towel and thinking, well, it is better, but it's not three times better, but it's, uh, and there is something, uh, if I do an extravagance now, I buy better paper towel. So, and it's like, but it's things change, but it took years and years of not always having what you wanted right at that moment, just waiting. And then the decision to get rid of credit cards was scary at first, because it's like,
well,
if you've
that's how a
had
lot of
them,
people just operate. They always
if
just
you
kind
have
of
them
run
your
on a
whole
bit of a
life, and then
deficit and
yeah. But I mean, I wasn't good enough that I could keep and not use it. So I didn't have any. Got rid of all of them and had a debit card. And I used that because it's no good without money.
yeah.
And then I have a credit card again now, but now I'm disciplined with it. I pay it off every month, and it's a little bit safer than a debit card, but because there's some protections on credit cards you can't get. But you can't use those as excuses to keep credit cards if you can't
No.
be disciplined with them,
Don't
because
use the
you
3% cash back as an excuse to keep a 30% interest payment.
yeah like,
That's where
oh
people
well,
get into. If you
they
if you
get
can
stuck.
pay off your cards at the end of the month, I think they're an asset.
Yeah.
But if you can't, then they're a huge detriment.
Yeah,
And that just
you'll
takes
never break yourself out of that debt
it
trap. You
takes
just
an
won't.
honest look, and you
Yeah.
can look on your credit card statements. They will tell you how much you've paid. They'll tell you any fees. They'll tell you they're legally required to tell you how long it would take if you only make the minimum payment, which is where that attack mentality comes in. And in this message, you didn't even do like the how do you tackle debt conversation. And there's two ways to tackle it nowadays. There's the debt snowball, which would be like your Dave Ramsey method, where you list out all your debts. You start with the smallest one, and you work your way up paying it. That's one way to attack. The other one is a debt avalanche, where you list all your debts by interest rate, and you start paying off the highest interest rate first, and then you work your way down, and that has this conclusive effect. And whichever way you do, stick to a strategy. Um, I think both of us probably fall more into that snowball way of thinking. just because you got to start somewhere. And like, if you could just pay something off, then all that moves. And, the few folks I've consulted with about it, I'm like, just start with an easy mental victory somewhere. Some folks, it might be the avalanche method, but you kind of have to pick one, and go from there and attack it real strong. But
Yeah.
yeah, that word attack you used, I was like, that really is it, because it's ourselves. We're waging war with our desires
Yeah.
and our hearts.
And which is true in everything that we
Yeah.
do, right?
Yeah.
The thing about money and mammon in general is that for everybody, that's generally one of the hardest things to really sort of, got to be careful I say it, but to get to the cross. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm right there with you. I even made the last message I got to preach. It was on fasting, and I made the joke. You talk about fasting and giving, and you're like, oh, this is
Yeah.
gonna offend somebody, but
Yeah. And it's never meant. I saw someone. I was at the Winn Dixie Monday, and someone came up and said hi to me in the parking lot and said how much they appreciated the message because it wasn't, like it was helpful. And
Yeah.
okay, well, this is why, and this is how, and get there when you can, and and it's getting your heart, in a spot where, because it really should be. The hope would be that it's not you don't begrudge giving. You're like, look forward. Okay, I get to give that, and
Yeah.
that's yours. All right. Well, we were on that question a long time. What else you got?
We could talk about, because we often in our personal conversations discuss personal finances too. It became a hobby of mine because I got mine figured out. How old was I in 24? I would have been 33, turning 34. Not that I have everything figured out, but I just made the decision I wasn't going to carry credit card balances anymore, paid off the vehicles, and it's really life changing when you can get there.
Because it's crushing when you've got
It's
that debt. And
there's
you
just
can't, and you're
always
like,
this balance, and it's like,
"Ah."
oh my god, and you'd pay it off, and then it would just come
it just
back
keeps
because you
getting
just ching
bigger and
ching
higher and higher.
ching ching.
Yeah.
What time is it? 1:30. Let's see. Good question. I think we'll end with this question because finance talk. I feel like we've kind of covered everything in the discussion guide just with our pastoring. The sermon ended with 4 reflective questions. Where do we look first for security, peace, significance, and hope? And how do we honestly answer those questions? And how would you say we can reorient our heart toward God in those areas?
Well, they're just very. If you ask them honestly, when you're not at peace, where do you go? And oftentimes, when people are not at peace, they look for something quick to fix it instead of, sometimes you got to wrestle through with God. And the same goes with the other questions. Where do you, what do you turn, who or what are you turning to? Everything always gets back to those trees. But, who's your security? They're just great questions. And your significance. Are you okay with maybe not having the newest of this and the best of that and the greatest of these? And these are questions that people struggle with. Sometimes for significance they will buy a vehicle that they don't really have to have because it says something, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so all those things are there. And none of those things are meant to make anybody feel guilty. It's just, I think they're there to make us aware of how trapped. I said this during the sermon. I mean it. I think a lot of people are trapped and don't even realize it because it's so common in the culture. They're like, well, that's what everybody does. Not really, but it's what enough people do that it feels like that's what everybody does. And how hard is it to live in the world? And even with, so everybody makes those decisions. One of the things that your mother and I felt good about doing is that we were able to get both of you through college through lots of different fancy plans without student loans.
Mm-hmm.
And we found scholarships, and you didn't go to the best, you went close and you stayed home, and you we started you early, and we did community college because it was cheaper for some of it. And then, a scholarship opened up to keep you at it was a really good private school, but through the Navy base. And so these things for both of you came up, and you ended up with bachelor's degrees and no student loans. And, you've gone on and gotten a couple of masters since then, and you've been able to. So, a lot of people now in their mindset, they have debt starting in their adult lives that's pretty significant, right? They have, and so it's just a whole mindset that we're really having to go after, because it's very hard to have peace there. And it doesn't mean that you can't have nice things. I think you should. And I think God likes that. And I think God is very generous and extremely faithful, that sometimes we have to wait, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
But anyway,
On the student loan discussion, there's basically two different categories for it. There's federal student loans that aren't like terrible. They have a lower interest rate, but where people get in trouble are those private student loans. And those can have a ridiculous interest rate. And you're paying for like an online education that AI is probably generated now, and you end up with like $250,000 of debt for a arts bachelor's degrees. And not saying that's a bad thing to have, but like, bro, we can't justify it. So one of the things I'm always thankful for is that, yeah, you and mom sacrificed so much so that we could have this opportunity. And there's something to be said in terms of money management, teaching our kids how to handle it. So, both of my boys, they're only 12 and 11, but the last 2 summers I've had them taking budgeting classes. And they have, a little program, I found a little fintech that lets them have some bank accounts and have savings accounts for them. And then I show them what's in it. I'm like, hey, this is how it's growing. This is how compounding interest works. And, if we can teach our kids to save and not spend everything right away, the hope is that transfers into adulthood, where you just build a discipline of saving. And if you can start life with some savings in your adult life and learn contentment, sky's the limit, you know? But,
and like I said, that wasn't my experience. So we've had to learn it over time.
But yet, without your sacrifice, I wouldn't be able to help my kids do this. So there is generational impact to money management, both for good and for bad. And how important is it that we figure it out? So, if you were in a situation where your parents couldn't help you, be the difference maker, for your kids. But you got to start here. You got to start with getting on a budget and managing it. It has to start somewhere. And, anyway, that's really the talk for it is spend less, earn more. Thank you all. I love doing that when we talk about finances. It's such a obnoxious one-liner that's so important. But thank you all for listening. It was a great message, Dad. I'm looking forward to being up this weekend. Had a bit of a break, but gonna go through it, and we'll talk about that during our Bible Institute podcast on Thursday. But anyway, we will see y'all next time. God bless you.
Yep. Bye.